Pardon?
You
Got
got
my
your
heart going. Yeah,
okay. Well, we hope to get your mind going.
my
Yeah.
mind is going.
And your soul. Eileen, why don't you start off your reading for us? 1 through 4, please.
Sure. A wicked person flees through though no one gives chase, but the righteous are as confident as a lion. When there is rebellion in the land, many are its rulers, but with someone who has understanding and knowledge, stability will last. A poor man who withholds what is due to the wretched is like a destructive rain that leaves no food. Those who forsake instruction praise the wicked, but those who heed instruction fight them.
Okay. Well, something interesting, I think, on every doublet here. Would you like to start? Would anybody like to start? Okay. All right. So, a wicked person flees. What does it mean a wicked person flees? It's an existential statement. Wicked people flees, I think, because this next is righteous, also existential. They're confident as lions. So we understand that righteous are confident. But what does it mean that a wicked person is fleeing? There's no one right answer here. Go ahead.
Hmm. He's wrong, so he's running away.
Okay, so what is he running away from? Because he's afraid of getting caught, for instance?
Hmm.
Yeah, no, that might be because he's running away because he knows he's wrong. He knows he's guilty,
Right.
right? He's um, he's hiring a lawyer because he knows he's guilty. I'm affected by whatever I watched on TV the night before. I watched the latest, I guess, the last episode of Landman. I don't know if anybody else watched that. I thought it was kind of enjoyed the series very much, and it seems to me this last night was the end of the series, though. Who knows? Um,
I think you have to understand that with the couplet that goes with it, though. I think
okay.
so. A wicked person flees, though no one gives chase, meaning that everybody else, the people that won't chase them, they're all cowardly.
Mm.
But the righteous are as confident as a lion, meaning they're courageous and they'll go after the wicked person.
Okay. Okay. So
Hmm.
that's in the tradition of the Proverbs where one line definitely fills in the other line, completes the other line. Sometimes it's the opposite, sometimes it completes. One thing that struck me in reading this was this is kind of paranoia. There's an anxiety, a paranoia that wicked people have because they're so mistrustful of others. In other words, they know that they are untrustworthy, so they mistrust others. I think all of us have met people like that, where whatever you say, whatever you do, sometimes they always interpret it in the most negative way possible. And you realize that's who they are. That's what they do. And so that's how that it struck me as a wicked person flees. Nobody's chasing this person, but he's fleeing from himself, his anxiety, his paranoia, I think anyway. But equally, it could be what Eileen, what you said that he's fleeing before people chase because he's guilty about something, or Malka that he's in contradistinction. The people around him we're talking about are not about that person so much. We're talking about society. One way or another, it's easy to project these two lines, I think, on characters that we know from the news or from TV, whatever it might be. Um, okay. So we had here a few things that bring this chapter together. There is a theory out there in biblical literature that chapters 28 and 29 are part of a collection of advice to royalty. I mentioned that last week because in some cases it's the last 6 lines of the previous chapter that we did last week that feels that perhaps is speaking to people that wear crowns. And so a lot of scholars have gone in that direction, that this whole section is from the royal court. Fox doesn't really accept that. He doesn't feel it's needed. He says lots of the Proverbs, in all of the book of Proverbs, lots of them are going towards the royal court because that is the Sitz im Leben, as we say in biblical research. That's the place in life where the book of Proverbs came together, was edited. In the royal courts, that's where they had people whose job was to be wise people and to collect that wisdom together. So it's only natural that part of it would go towards the rulers. So that's one opinion as to what we're doing today. I didn't find it so much. To my mind, this particular chapter doesn't speak necessarily to leadership. It does in some cases. In this particular case, the way Malka read it is kind of society slash leaders of society, societal leaders, how they must act. Instead, though, I found all sorts of little words and things that connect. And one of those words that connects is words are animals. There's the love the kvir, the lion cub here, or the lion here. We'll see a lion and a bear later on. Another one is in the in the fifth line. The word rush. And in the first line, Rasha, there's a lot of Rash, which means poor person, Rasha, which means evil or wicked, and Ra, which means bad, negative as well. And okay, yeah, okay. Um, all right. Now, uh, so going on to the second two lines before we get to that more problematic fifth. Uh, wh- so Pesha, Befesha Eretz is a strange combination. Eretz, we understand land. Pesha is crime. Here it's translated as rebellion in the land. I don't know that we need to go there. But when there is injustice, when there is anarchy in the land, maybe not rebellion, it's rebellion. If you assume this is advice to a king or to a ruler, then you say rebellion. But if we perhaps see this in a wider sense, it's anarchy. It's just there's nothing really going on. And 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 the fact when there's anarchy, there are gangs, there are militias, all the different places that we've seen, oh, in the Middle East in particular, but other places as well in Africa, where there's anarchy, where there's a lack of a civil society which is the rule of law. Um, power brokers pop up, and yet you need to have some sort of high intelligence. You could rule with brute force. But in order to make things work in a varied society, in a heterogenic society, you need to have brains. You need to be smart. And I think to me, that's what this is saying. Someone who has understanding knowledge, then stability will last. You got to have to figure out not only how to stand up for yourself, which is the selfish way, but also not only to stand for principles, but also how politics work, the art of compromise. Comments? No, Eileen, what's wrong, Eileen?
Well, I mean, it's so hard to detach oneself from what's happening in the world today, from what we're reading. I
Hmm.
mean, I mean, you can project, we can project what's happening on a day-to-day basis into this, and try and understand sense.
Has
It's
anybody,
hard to do.
yeah, has anybody read Ezra Klein, Ezra Klein's book, latest book? Written with somebody else, I think a Jewish name. People know who Ezra Klein is, New York Times. He's written a book called Abundance. It's not so new. I mean, it's probably a year old, maybe it's more than a year, but it talks about some of the book talks about much of I'm listening, so it's hard for me when I'm listening to a book to get a gauge for how much of the book it is, right? I don't know how much I have left to listen to. I don't look at the screen. And much of what he talks about, and he uses California as an example, is an explanation as to why progressive Democratic Party, why why that viewpoint and that way of governing was defeated. And much of it had to do with the inability of the progressive left, without saying, well, what about the right? No, let's just talk about the progressive left. I think to compromise, to use wisdom. His examples are affordable housing. And the fact that California has so many regulations and has put forth these things that many of us thought were wonderful, like, protection of endangered species, whether they're animals or plant life. And yet some of these laws and regulations, and others as well, have made it virtually impossible to build affordable housing in a way that makes sense from an economic point of view. And hence we have this huge problem. Now, it's far more complex than that. I don't want to oversimplify Klein's um, presentation, but it seems to me it's something that I saw as well for myself. In many of the ultra liberal circles or liberal progressive circles that I travel in, um, sometimes it feels like it's a zero sum game. It's always a zero sum game, and there's an inability to be nuanced. I'll give you an example of the last 2 days. Many rabbis are organizing, along with other clergy and other people in the nation, to go to Minnesota today, tomorrow. There's a huge training for clergy tomorrow. Over 60 rabbis alone. Over 60 rabbis are going to march. It's the Selma moment of this generation. Some are older, but most of them are younger. Most of them are low or mid income. I can tell by what's on a listserv. I can tell by the questions about where they can stay, how what's the cheapest way to go? Is it cheaper to go to another city, not to Indiana, not to Minneapolis? Okay, all that's in the background, and then somebody says, "I'm encouraged by the statement of the Ferguson Police Department." Now, I didn't see the statement, so I saw the to it. Apparently they're standing up against ICE. And and then I had a meeting of the Social Justice Committee, and this kind of thing came up as well. And I said, we all checked in. My check-in was when I saw that, and then the reaction to that by one of the leaders, of the rabbinic leaders of this at this moment of time, in this particular issue against ICE, said, "Well, no, don't. There should be no misunderstanding that they're not with us until they're absolutely out there fighting ICE. They've got to be fighting ICE. There's only two sides to be on. Either you're for right or you're for wrong." And it struck me, and I understand this person is there. This person is wrapped up in this whole thing. But for me, standing up outside, felt to me like you got to take some of the wins where you can find them. And if I'm looking for a glimmer of hope, I'm looking for inspiration. And that's why I asked Madalena to put yesterday, not only that, but also Mayor Naomi Soto was our guest at our clergy lunch yesterday as well. That's why I asked her to put what she did in our glimmers of hope. We cannot drop into despair, and I didn't understand that you were necessarily, Eileen, dropping into absolute despair. But we've got to be able to see things in a very, very, I believe, this is the rabbi speaking here. I suggest my wisdom to you is we've got to learn, we have to really utilize our ability to see the nuance and to take the wins. And if the Palm Springs City Council and Police Department are doing what they can to help people protest in a safe way, that's a good thing. I don't expect the police department to go up against ICE, right? They're not going to fight them with guns. That's not a so to me, that's kind of like the understanding and knowledge stability will last. Any comments or reactions to that? For those that read the Hebrew in line 4, Uva Adam Mevin Yodea Kein Yarich. Mevin Yodea is a little bit strange because we would expect a Vav Chibur, the Vav, the and, the connective. Anyway, the whatever it's called in English, the Vav Chibur, and so then you would have Mevin Yodeh in the same way you have Rosh V'Oshek above that, for instance, and so in Fox's translation, he just has, but someone with understanding, stability will last, and he says because the word Yodea here is what we call a doublet. Now, it's not that important. It's basically one word, a synonym with another word that appears. Sometimes you have that. Sometimes you have the same word that appears twice, and that's just an easier to understand graphics mistake. But sometimes you have in ancient texts, and I've seen this, you see this a lot in medieval manuscripts where the rules are not strict the way they are with biblical text, that another word comes after it, and it's another version of the ancient text. And maybe somebody the scribe at that time wanted to put both in. That's his hypothesis here. Okay, but now we have this. What does it mean? A poor man who withholds what is due to the wretched. Any
But
ideas?
maybe that means I was looking at the line you were just talking about. Maybe I would probably read that and say, but someone who has understandable knowledge. People can have knowledge, but no one understands it. They're so esoteric and they're in ivory tower that no one understands them. So all of your knowledge means nothing because nobody understands it. But somebody who has understandable knowledge.
Yeah, yeah, I like that. I like that. Don't know if that would have been the original text, the original shot, but certainly the way we have it now, I like that very much. I'll buy it. I'll buy it. Yeah. Um, okay. So we have this word, this expression, gever rush, a poor man. And if it's in the context the way it's translated, a poor man who withholds what is due to the wretched, meaning a poor person who's screwing other poor people, probably that's what it means, um, then I guess a possible meaning would be um, this is what Fox, if we stick to the text the way it's written in the Hebrew and the Masoretic text, then it means an oppressed who himself is an oppressor.
Mm.
Did anybody watch that final episode of Landman? Oh, you guys, you don't watch anything I watch. Maybe you're not watching TV. Maybe you're studying Torah when maybe I should be studying Torah. Richard, nothing. What am I going to do? I'm going to reference. Okay.
No, I didn't watch that. I mean, I didn't even know what is Landman.
Taylor Sheridan, another one of his epic series. It doesn't matter. And basically what happens is that a guy walks out in a bar, and his fiance is a bar server. She went out to get some fresh air, and she's approached by somebody she had dissed at the bar, and he's raping her. And so the skinny fiance comes out and sees it, and gets him in a chokehold, flips him over, and starts to punch him. And it's on the cameras that he punches him 17 times. Afterwards, at the hospital, he dies. The perpetrator dies. And so now the police want to charge him with homicide and not self-defense, because he could have done that after 2 or 3 punches, but he went, and it's documented. And so one of the philosophical question that comes up in the scene, or in the scenes that around this part of the story, the storyline is can can a can the criminal be a victim? Is the criminal When is a criminal a victim, and when is a criminal just a criminal? Right. So the same thing here. What can somebody, and the truth is we do know of oppressed who are oppressors themselves because of their situation. But Fox suggests here instead or brings other suggestions. One of them is that you should read Gever, perhaps. No, three. Forget Fox right now. Three different possible suggestions. That it doesn't say Gever Rash, but it says Gever Rasha. And you could see how the ayin in the next word could have been. That's kind of an explanation for the graphic error, and that would mean a wicked man, and one who withholds from poor people, and then he's like a destructive rain that leaves no food, which we'll talk about in just a second. Another possibility would be gevera, an ayin instead of a shin, once again because of the ayin in the next word. So that'd be a bad man. Rasha, a bad man. Rasha, wicked. Ra, a bad man. Or it could be, some people suggest, and I don't like this suggestion at all, is it's a gever rosh, that is the top guy, the man who's at the head, the chieftain, the political ruler. And people like that particular um, emendation to putting an olive in between the resh and the shin. And there are times when rosh is spelled resh shin as well, especially in the Dead Sea Scrolls, if I remember correctly. The people, but the reason for that emendation is those that want to see all these proverbs directed at the leadership. So then he would be the head man. Okay, but what does it mean though when we understand some of the poor, the wretched are becoming even it's injustice towards the wretched, the poor. So what does it mean is like a destructive rain that leaves no food?
Rain that kills the crops. Too much rain
Yeah, too
can
much
kill the
rain.
crops.
Okay,
A rain that was meant to produce food destroys what it's meant to produce.
right. And that way and that would connect to if he's a ruler, right?
Mhm.
He's supposed to take care of the people. Yeah. Okay, I didn't make notes. I know there were some other ideas that he floated, but it's yeah. Okay. Oh, I know what he floated. Another interesting idea that if it's the water metaphor, that sometimes evil people have henchmen who themselves are poor, and while they expect to get a trickle down from whatever that wickedness to the wretched is being doing, that money being stolen from the wretched, if figures that he'll get some of that trickle down, and that's why the next line is the trickling down. No, but that's not that trickling down is not going to help you. You're not going to get any food from it. You'll end up it'll be disastrous for you. Okay, it's difficult text, sometimes interesting ways of solving it, but I think we get the gist. And the last one is again we have that word that same another one of those terms of Ra, Rosh, Rash. Here it's Rasha. Ozvei Torah Yahalu Rasha, right? Those who forsake instruction. It's not those who leave the Torah, right? Leave being religious, right? Here Torah's instruction in the simplest understanding or meaning of the word, and those people who ignore or forsake, but ignore um, uh, instruction, they are actually, if they're ignoring the wisdom and instruction, then in essence they're praising those who are wicked. Yeah. So the opposite of those who leave the Torah are Shomrei Torah. Everybody, that's sometimes the name of a synagogue. There's one in San Fernando Valley that I think they merged with another synagogue. Shomrei Torah, the guardians of the Torah. Okay. Anything else on this section? All right. So, Charles, you want to read 5 to 10?
Sure.
Chuck. I'm sorry, Chuck.
That's fine either way. The wicked cannot discern judgment, but those who seek God discern all things. Better is a poor man who lives blamelessly than a rich man whose ways are crooked. An intelligent son heeds instruction, but he who keeps company with gluttons disgraces his father. He who increases his wealth by loans at discount or interest amasses it for one who is generous to the poor. He who turns a deaf ear to instruction, his prayer is an abomination. He who misleads the upright into an evil course will fall into his own pit, but the blameless will prosper.
Okay. Kind of more of the same, right? A lot of this is more of the same. Um, any comments or questions before I share with you my notes? Okay, God is brought into the picture here, right? We haven't had God for a while so much as God in this part of the book of Proverbs. God has been relatively absent, but here is those who seek God, mevakshe Adonai. Another term is mevakshe panecha, those who seek your face, God. Seek My Face is the name of Art Green's first of a trilogy of theology that he wrote. Oh, I'm not sure when it was, 20 years. I can't remember. Anyway, I've quoted from it before. It's extremely accessible theology, which is based on his knowledge of Hasidism and mysticism, Jewish mysticism. But and one of those is Mevakshe Panecha. The term is beloved by me for another reason. When my folks started to spend more time in Jerusalem, my folks of blessed memory, and they would go each time for a month before Airbnb, before it was so fashionable to, or it was in practice to rent apartments or stay. They were renting apartments. I was always the front man. I got a realtor who specialized in month or 2 month long apartments of somebody's real house. And they loved that. Oh, did they love that? Not being able to have breakfast in the kitchen and not having to go out for every meal and to see the books that people had and the art that they had. My father loved that. And uh, so they started to stay in a particular area, and my father was very excited to go to the synagogue. My father and mother went together, but it was my father who really carried the torch for the synagogue called Mivakshe Derech, those who are seeking the way.
Mm.
And so I knew about it already from the early 80s. I was Orthodox. Maybe I knew about it in the 70s already. It's a congregation that was formed late 50s, early 60s, maybe early 60s. It was egalitarian when it was formed in the early 60s. It was
Mm.
the first synagogue in Israel to be egalitarian. They were students of Mordechai Kaplan, Rabbi Mordechai Kaplan. One in particular was a leader, Yaakov Cohen, Jack Cohen, who had been a very close student of Kaplan's and moved to Israel and was the Hillel rabbi at Hebrew University in the 50s and 60s. There were a number of other famous people who were members, Professor Zev Falk, all of blessed memory, professor who was a law professor, Professor Chava Latsus Yafet, who was a professor of Arabic literature and Islam, who she was my teacher afterwards. And I got to hang out with all these wonderful intellectual people. And so this was Mavakshe Derech, but I only met them after I changed, the late 80s. And I went on to become their first employee. They were very, very democratic. Even though there were rabbis, members, they did not have a rabbi on purpose. So they didn't hire me as their rabbi. They hired me as their educational coordinator. And that's what I did for 4 years while I was in rabbinical school, Mevakshe Derech, because you never know the way. You're seeking the way. You're in a constant existential state of seeking. Back to our text here. That's why I love this term, Mevakshe Adonai. It's not people who seek God. It's not people that know God, right? They seek God. And that's flexible. That's a changing term. Okay. So not necessary at all to understand the meaning of the text, but what this kind of phrase means to me. And the fact that they understand everything, it's not Fox Point, not they understand everything in the world, but when it comes to judgment, if you're wicked, you don't get it. If you are a seeker of God, that is, you have a humility and you listen to the wisdom and I will answer that you pray as well. You don't just do justice, but you pray and you focus on the humanity, on the sanctity of humanity, then you will understand all things injustice. Fox adds injustice. That's understood here. Again, we have the Rash in the Hebrew in the third line, Tov Rash holech betumo. So Rosh here is got to be a poor man, right? The way it's written, Resh Shin. So I wouldn't add an ayin here to make it Rasha or substitute the shin for an ayin, as I suggested above. Here it really is the poor man, and the poor man lives blamelessly because his life is simpler, I think. And it's not that every poor man lives, but that is a thing out there in the world. The poor are less likely to get into trouble than the wealthy for various reasons that we all know. And compared to the Kesh Drachim, the one who is crooked and crooked of way, crooked in path, who is the wealthy person. So does this mean every wealthy person is crooked? No, but that's out there in the world, right? This mistrust for people. Yeah. Okay. Um, anything on that before we? Oh, I have another thing to this. The Tov Rosh Holech Betumo. It's better a person who is poor and and living in a just way on the straight path than somebody who's crooked. It brought me to remember something which I don't think is exactly connected, but this term in halacha, which is mutav yiyu shogegim masher b'mezid. It's better for people to err in Jewish law. This is from the Talmud, to err in to err unintentionally sin than to do it intentionally. And this comes up in halachic discussions about it comes up in the Talmud about women and their practice of carrying water on Shabbat, but it comes up in various situations where a rabbi is told better not to teach this particular topic and that something is forbidden if you know they're going to do it anyway. So it's better let them do it. You know what? Unlike the saying that ignorance of the law is whatever. What is the saying? Richard, what's the saying that ignorance of the law is no defense?
No
No
defense.
excuse.
Yeah, no excuse.
Ignorance of the law is no excuse.
Yeah. So here it's ignorance of the law makes you in a better plane than somebody who's intentionally breaking the law. Right? It's an interesting way of looking at things. Again, a nuanced way that it's not zero sum. In any case, I'm not sure that really has to do with here, but there's, I think perhaps it's placating those who are, you're poor, you're upset, you should know, you're holier, you're more right, you're more righteous than the way. If you had money, you'd be doing a lot of things that you shouldn't be doing. Okay. This could be like on the wall, embroidered on the wall of a young socialist club or something. Yeah, the Mao Zedong club of the local school.
I'm more cynical about this. I see this as propaganda to keep the poor people down. It's like telling them you're poor, you're all righteous people, while the rich people, those rich people, you don't want to be rich like them because they're all a bunch of schmucks.
Right. Look, yeah, look, not only they're a bunch of schmucks, look at me, I'm rich. You don't want my life. I've got to worry all the time about the rent being paid outside, about the tax I pay. Yeah. And meanwhile, you have, yeah,
I got it, you don't.
yeah, I get it. I hear you. I see that as well. Yeah. Okay.
It's just to make poor people feel better, not feel so bad that they're poor. They won't be rebellious.
Yeah. So you like so you're kind of for you, this is about leadership, political leadership.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Um, so now somebody, an understanding or an intelligent, again, one of these words, mevin, yodea, understand, knows, an intelligent and understanding son is one who keeps the Torah or one who keeps the Torah. Notzer Torah here is translated heeds instruction. It's a slight difference, but notzer is like shomer is keeps, watches over, keeps, observes. I guess that's the same as heeding, right? Okay, no difference. Yeah, okay. As opposed to somebody who keeps company with the glutton, one might say here somebody who keeps uh, company, with the wealthy, maybe. I don't know. If we're continuing on to the same idea from the previous doublet or couplet. Okay. So here this is about father and son. It doesn't feel like this is necessarily from the royal court, but it could have been attached to whatever was above or whatever was below. It was therefore brought into the anthology that way. Um, Again, one of those about marbeh hono beneshech v'tarbit, one who increases their wealth by loans and at discount or interest. Just loans and interest issues are talked about quite a bit in the Torah. In Shmot, Vayikra, Dvarim, at least in those three books of the Torah. It's a big deal. And while there are some cases, at least according to Proverbs, where you can lend with interest, The general thing was that Jews don't lend with interest, and hence the what many of you remember from when you were kids, perhaps the early iteration of Jewish federations was Jewish free loan societies. I don't know if anybody remembers that from growing up at all or knowing. You don't see that term out there so much. There is one of Los Angeles, the Jewish Free Loan of Los Angeles. In Israel, it's very, very prevalent. We call them a gamach, gimilut chasadim. It's you borrow from the gamach and you borrow without interest. Um, yeah, I never personally needed to do it, but I did sign for a student of mine who was having some rough times financially. Twice I put up my whatever collateral of whatever I had to put up for collateral so that he could get that loan and pay it back interest free, which was a big deal in Israel because of inflation. Yeah. Okay. So if you do those things, then you're going to you're going to be paid back in the end. Yeah. Okay. So let me the person who does these unsavory financial deals, takes advantage of people in their hour of need, in the end is creating a fortune for those who are more generous to the poor. Fox points out here, he quotes Ehrlich, who is a fascinating, fascinating Jewish scholar, biblical scholar who became Christian, and he has two different commentaries to the Torah, one in German and one in Hebrew, where sometimes he argues with himself in a very impolite fashion. Uh, that's an interesting thing to itself. But here, Ehrlich says that this is not this is not a couplet or a proverb which is based upon knowledge, which is based upon logic, based upon the rules of the world. This is a wishful proverb. This he calls it a pious belief proverb, and he says, and there are very few proverbs in the book of Proverbs like that. In other words, what he wanted to say was almost everything we can see in the book of Proverbs makes sense. We may not like it, we do like it, but it makes sense. This doesn't make sense. If you were a lawyer, you would say, what basis, what legal basis is for you to argue that at all? There's no legal basis. There's no studies, there's no facts. It's a pious belief. I believe, says the person who wrote this, that if you have these unsavory business practices, in the end, whatever you think you're gaining fortune-wise, it's going to go to those who have much nobler ways of doing business.
I don't see how that's negative, though. If you increase your wealth by charging interest, and it's amassed for one who is generous to the poor, in other words, all that interest that you accumulated, you're giving to the poor?
No, no, no,
Take
no.
that.
It amasses. Look at the Hebrew. Lechonen dalim yikabsenu.
Okay.
The profits will be collected yikabsenu for the one who's chonen dalil.
Mhm.
Okay? All right. Let's see. I don't think I've got anything else that I made notes here. Anything else? Oh, of course. We have this one. Mesir ozno mishmat Torah. The person who literally takes his ear away from the listening of Torah or the lessons of Torah, his prayer is considered an abomination. That's a pretty strong thing to say, right? Right. Yeah. You got to go to biblical literature for this, and I think that and this is a good little Misa story that illustrates it. Just a bit about halacha. From time to time I talk about Jewish law here, other places in the Book of Tobit. We're talking about Jewish law now. How do we know Jewish law or the history of Jewish law? Well, the first thing is to look in the Torah and then to look in other biblical books where it expresses itself. So you've got one kind is where it is laid down as the law, as stipulation, regulations. Another way, of course, is to look at stories, anecdotal law. I think that's what that's called, legal area. So you have statutory law, maybe it's called, I don't know, statutory law and anecdotal law. There's part of the anecdotal law is perhaps in cases where there's no, or is considered precedence, right? So that's precedence. How do we have law in the Talmud? The same thing. The Mishnah will often have this case, this and this is this and this one disagrees, and this one disagrees, and the Chachamim, the sages say this, or sometimes no bottom line. That's the greatness of our Talmudic tradition, that there in the Talmud there is no, very rarely is there a bottom line. It ends up in the air, not just the cases where it says teku, where it's a tie, but in many cases there's just a long conversation, debate, which happened over hundreds of years in different geographical locations. And that's the conversation, that's the discussion. So it's not until we get to like the 11th century, 12th century, where maybe a little bit earlier, where different rabbis said, yes, but what we need to do, I need to create literature that tells people what to do. Whereas beforehand, it was more like you knew of the Talmudic discussions, you asked the local rabbi who knew of those conversations, who gave the law. It wasn't solidified, it wasn't canonized. And then Jewish books of law, they too are not exactly canonized in the same way. Close to canonization is the Rambam's Mishneh Torah, but not so much. But the Shulchan Aruch, Rabbi Yosef Karel's Shulchan Aruch in the 16th century in Sfat, is kind of on the way to being canonized, together with the notations or annotations of Rabbi Moshe Isserlich, the Ramah from Krakow, Poland in the 17th century. Okay, so how do we know? Back to the Talmud. Where do we find this particular verse from Proverbs, which is implemented to teach us something, maybe not exactly the halacha, but the right way to live? And that's what we have here in Masechet Shabbat, in the tractate that deals with the laws of Shabbat. Rav Asav saw Rav Hamnuna, who was prolonging his prayer. He's in the Beit Midrash, which was also the synagogue, study hall synagogue, the same building, the same room, and he's standing and he's steigen away, he's davening away. And I see this a lot, especially in Chabad, where especially the Hasidim, the Satmar Hasidim, others that come from the East Coast for just a little bit of time, and I see some of them, they're not with the minyan at all, because their way of praying is much, 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 much slower. He said, uh, they abandon eternal life, the study of Torah, and engage in temporal life. There's something wrong here. I must have cut. Hold on. There's something missing here. Okay, I'm just going to, instead of going back, I'm going to reconstruct. I think it's like he said, those that do that, they abandon eternal life, the study of Torah, they abandon and engage in temporal life. No, there's something off here. Okay. I would just say no, basically two ways. The one who davens a long time and seen by somebody who's very strict about studying. The one who
Right.
davens is engaging in lofty affairs, but not about life in general. You need to emphasize more on life. And whereas Rav Humanuna says, no, there's a time for prayer and there's a distinct time for Torah, and they're different. They're different times. You don't have to shorten. Anyway, Rabbi Yirmiyah was sitting before Rabbi Zira. This is the story itself. And I apologize. I must have messed up something with omitted some of the.
Rabbi, it says, speaking of prayer, the Gemara relates that Rav saw Rav whom Hamnuna, who was prolonging his prayer. He said about him, they abandoned eternal life, the study of Torah, and engaged in temporal life, prayer, which includes requests for mundane needs.
Okay, thank you. So you're reading from the Steinsaltz
Right.
enhanced. Yeah,
Yes.
okay. And then go ahead, and Rav Hamnuna.
And Rav Hanuna held that the time for prayer is distinct and the time for Torah is distinct. The
Okay,
time that the
go
time
ahead.
that one devotes to prayer is not at the expense of the time devoted to Torah study. Similarly, the Gemara relates that Rav Yirmiyah was sitting before Rabbi Zera and they were engaged in the study of Halakha. The time for prayer was approaching and it was getting late, and Rabbi Yirmiyah was hurrying to conclude the subject that they were studying in order to pray. Rav Zera read this verse as applying to Rav Yirmiyah, and quote, who turns his ear from hearing Torah, his prayers also an abomination. Proverbs 28:9.
So the anecdote comes to tell us basically in the end that there's a time for each thing, right? And we're going to argue about how much to devote. But to my mind, this connects to the fact that people who pray more than deal with this world. Whether it's in meditation or lifting their own souls in mystical fashions of different traditions around the world, as opposed to getting out and solving problems here. And it's not that one is right and one is wrong. It's just my preference is not the mystical way of doing it. And it's an old argument, old tension between Jewish leader, how much do we and then, by the way, one could also say the same thing. How much do you study, and how much do you go out and do? So there's prayer, study, and doing. Torah, avodah, gemilut chasadim, and and of course the answer is a balance to life. I'm reminded here of Rav Kook's interpretation that I've brought a number of times on the Talmud and Brachot that says that one must pray, or one must always pray in a place where there are windows. On that, and doesn't explain why. Rashi explains so that you can look up into the sky, see the clouds, and say, "Oh, that's where God, Kisei Kavod, God's holy throne, noble throne. I'm inspired by looking into the sky, the infinite, right, in an emotional way." Rav Kook, in the first part of the 20th century, in his commentary on the book, on the tractate of Brachot, says the reason there need to be windows is to see the world outside, not to be just consumed with your own relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, with the Holy One, but you need to incorporate in your prayers all the stuff that's happening in the world. And that's been kind of if you pray with us on Kabbalat Shabbat morning, that news and what's happening in the world, at least I try, is always informing our prayer and our intentions and our kavanot. Okay, all right.
But Rabbi, aren't you an exception? I mean, in the Orthodox world, do they think about the outside world on Shabbat, or is it strictly for prayer?
It's not a cut and dry thing. I can remember when some yeshiva students, when I was in Kerem B'Yavneh, some Hesder yeshiva, same kind of army yeshiva program, they were lost or they got killed on hiking in the Golan Heights, and we were praying. That was brought, in other words, that's something from the news that was close to us that was brought into. The war had a huge effect on people's prayer, right? I'm sure you're not surprised to hear that, right? Now, does the situation in Minneapolis have an effect on an Orthodox synagogue's prayer? I don't know. I'm guessing there are some, especially students of Rabbi Avi Weiss, who are more aware of social justice. But Avi Weiss, though, modern Orthodox rabbi in New York, he was kind of the exception. In the Orthodox world, even amongst modern Orthodoxy, there's a reaction to say that Tikkun Olam is not a Jewish value, right? The thing that's the Reform movement and the Zionism kind of made that up. It's not. It's total misunderstanding of the term Tikkun Olam. In that way, they're correct. So yeah. And now, am I an exception? No, I think that 60 rabbis that are going to, I think they're a number. I don't know. I don't. I do know some rabbis. Yeah, I perhaps do it more. Yeah, especially Birkot HaShachar, the way that we do Birkot HaShachar. I think that I'm a little bit more, but I'm not the only one. I don't think.
Rabbi, where was the statement about praying with the window open? Where is that from?
If you send me a note, I'll send you the text from Masechet Brachot.
Okay.
Or if you just Google, one must always pray in a place where there's windows.
Okay.
And Masechet Brachot, you'll get to it. You won't get to the Rav Kook quote so much, I think, but I'm happy to share that with you. I used that in an article. Yes, remember, I think I told all of you I was writing an article. I actually finished it, wrote it, and it hasn't been published yet, in a book about meditation and Jewish prayer. And that's a key piece to the chapter that I wrote. That there can know. It's my reaction to, I know people in the world. I know a guy, I don't know if he was living in France with his wife in a little village, to be close to a Christian, to a nun who was a mystic, who was who was known, and he wanted to be close to her. She was their teacher. And we got into a debate once, machloket l'shem shamayim, a debate for the sake of heaven, as to what is more important, to live in a place like Jerusalem or Tel Aviv or in Israel, and to be constantly dealing with prayer and fixing society, or to be in a village, to be working on your spiritual self, to have this in meditation, and long hours of meditation each day, to bring the lower world together with the higher world, which is a key point in meditation, most meditation traditions, and to fix the world that way, because that's what tikkun olam means in the mystical world, right? That's the and of course I thought I was right and he thought he was right, but he said to me, the truth is, David, you have no idea what you're talking about. And the truth is, he was right, because he knew what I was talking about from his growing up and being in the world, being in the world. But I don't really know what a mystic's life is like. Okay, I think we need to go on. 11 and 16, Malka.
Yes. A rich man is clever in his own eyes, but a perceptive pauper can see through him. When the righteous exult, there is great glory, but when the wicked rise up, everyone makes themselves scarce. No one who covers up faults will succeed. One who confesses and gives them up will find mercy. Happy is the person who is anxious always, but one who is hard-hearted falls into misfortune. A roaring lion and a prowling bear is a wicked man ruling a helpless people. A prince who lacks understanding is very oppressive, but one who spurns ill-gotten gains will live long.
Okay. Somebody like to choose first? Any comments? Right? This idea that a rich man is clever in his own eyes, we've had things similar to that as well. And I've seen that. I've been exposed to people in my life who have become extremely wealthy. Um, in the hundreds of millions of dollars worth. I don't know that I know billionaires, but maybe I do. One of them is actually, it could be. And I saw as their wealth grew, so did their opinion of their own wisdom in all things. So you see that. Yeah, once worked with two very young men in their 20s who had done very well, and they were financing the nonprofit work I was doing. And very often it would be a little bit frustrating for me to have these two guys whose life experience was limited, except for their financial experience was very good and very lucky, perhaps. But you see that, yeah, people that have money are see, not all. I think sure there's many who are sophisticated and know what they don't know. Okay. We understand that as well. Um, Although people do say if somebody got so rich, they must be really smart. A lot of people, I think, Richard, you can attest to this as well. You've been around people as well in your career, that there are people that are not accidentally, but they're rich in a lucky way. They got lucky.
Most people, most wealthy people it's luck. It's also knowing the right thing, knowing something important, and being knowledgeable at the right time and in the right place.
Right.
So most rich people are very smart in a very narrow spaces, and that's where they make their wealth. But then they think they know everything else too. That's
Yeah.
the problem.
Okay. I will share with you a tale I've shared many times, I would imagine. I once went to an extremely wealthy woman living in Bel Air in her 80s. A rabbi friend of mine introduced us, and I remember she was smoking in her living room. And this was like in the 90s. No, this is in the aughts. And of course, you think, really, I want to say, are you allowed to smoke here? Are you allowed to smoke in your 80s? Well, she can do whatever she wants, right? She had inherited a tremendous amount of land, real estate, and money from her late husband. And I gave her my presentation, and she says, "Well, okay, I think I can give you $36,000." Now, for me, in the odds, $36,000 at one time for one gift, that was like a huge thing. And I said, of all the things that I talked to you about, what is there something you'd like this money to go towards? And she takes a smoke from her finger, blows it out, and she says, "Young man, I don't pretend to know nearly as much about your organization as you surely do. I think I can depend on you to put it where it's needed." Right? Now, in the fundraising world, that's kind of rare. It's kind of rare. People like to earmark, they like to feel they have that influence, that leverage. But here's a woman who her strength was her generosity. Her strength was her generosity and I guess respect for me as a rabbi. And she and her I will say who it is. Ruth Ziegler is her name, and her legacy continues after her death, and her husband's death. And the Ziegler Rabbinical School at the University of Judaism, now the American Jewish University, is named after her and her family. And that endowment from her is providing in a huge way for that particular rabbinical program, which I am very, very respectful of. Okay. All right. Yes. No. Okay, so let's look at it. I think we'll finish with this section here. Just one last thing I guess we need to go to. Um, yeah. Somebody who's covering up their sins. No one who covers up faults or sins here, mechaseh pisha'av, more than faults or crimes, will succeed. Right? In the end, it'll become known. But one who confesses and gives up will find mercy. I'm in the middle of the section. Here the modeh is aval, modeh ve'ozev yirucham. And these words, modeh ve'ozev yirucham, the person who admits, who comes clean, and leaves, modeh, to admit, ozev leaves, will be mercy will be shown to that person. That's a saying. That's a saying in Hebrew.
I'm,
That,
I'm wondering who gives the mercy, who
God.
dispenses the mercy.
Yeah, I think it go either for God, but if we see this in the context of wisdom for rulers, it's the ruler as well. So if the
Rose up a bit.
Yeah, the rabbi froze.
Yeah, he froze.
In Palm Springs, I'm in Chicago. We don't freeze here.
Not much.
It's above freezing today.
Well, we're expecting 2 feet of snow this weekend.
This weekend below zero.
Hmm.
Yeah, but we had an earthquake
What is
2 days
that? You're
ago.
making me cold. I gotta zip up.
Well, what was it? You had an earthquake? Wow.
We had an earthquake. I was studying Exodus, and we were talking about crossing the river, and the table moved. My whole desk moved. The light moved. It was so eerie. Yeah, it was like a 4.9. No damage, but it was eerie. Richard, didn't you feel it?
Oh yeah. You're going next door and says, "Was there an earthquake or was it just me?" I always say, you should all the dumb comments. Yeah, it was an earthquake.
Okay, so as I was saying, what was I saying?
Mercy from whom?
How it's used in Hebrew, modern Hebrew in Israel today, is it's used in a theological sense in Orthodox worlds, but it's used in the secular Israeli society as that person will be excused, that society will have mercy upon them. If they admitted that they messed up, if they do a public apology, that we see now with social media a lot.
Mea
We also see,
culpa.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But it said, well, he'll find mercy rather than receive mercy. But
Yeah.
maybe I'm splitting hairs.
Well, Yerucham in Hebrew can be, I would say, will be mercified, will be treated with mercy. Yeah. Yerucham. I think that's just I don't know why they chose will find mercy as will is that the same as will receive mercy or yeah, it leaves the mercy giver unknown, whether it's the king, God, or society. Okay. Quick. Yeah, I guess we would do quick.
Find mercy or leave mercy. Maybe I didn't understand the Hebrew. Yeah, Rahum.
Yerucham. It's a pual,
Uh-huh.
so it is
Passive. We'll find. That makes sense then. We'll find mercy.
will be forgiven.
Adzav is to find.
No.
I
Modeh
am
ve'ozeh. The person who admits it, who confesses and leaves, stops
Oh,
doing
and
it,
okay, now I understand. Okay.
that person
Okay.
will be the recipient of rachamim,
Okay.
mercy. You know what? We'll leave the Talmud for next time, but just to look at this, once again, we have the animals here, the roaring lion, here the prowling bear, fox has the ravenous bear. Um, in Hebrew, Ari Nohem, that's easy, the roaring lion, that Nohem is to roar. And a dove, the bear, Shokek. Shokek in many cases in biblical language is hungry, or yeah. So prowling, it's harder to justify that, but you know, I guess the idea, they must have a good reason why they translate it this way. Um, and again, it ends with the prince here. So let's leave the Talmud. We'll pick up this last section of Umodeh ve'ozeh v'yirucham, the one who confesses and gives them up, that is the sins, will find mercy, will be mercied. That will factor into the piece of Talmud that we will start at next week. Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Rita
Thank you.
Claire, I hope you're all right. You were quiet today, but I hope everything is all right. You're good? Okay. All right. All right, folks. Thank you, Madalena. Weather the storm.